Parshas Emor, however, we are speaking about Shavuos this week and next week. We will be, Bezrat Hashem, discussing topics that have to do with Shavuos. I have to say at the outset, to give credit where credit is due, to say B'Shem Omro. Okay, today's shiur is a gift from the secret weapon, Herschel Wien, the genius, the creative thinker, the humble one. By the way, we have a treat. Bezrat Hashem, Le'iloi Nishmas, his father, on his father's yahrzeit, Heshi is going to give the shiur. And I don't know if you've met Heshi.
When is it?
No, it's later in the year. It's December. It's December because he's busy. And I said, Heshi, you have to give a shiur one day. He's like, nah. So I said, okay, for your father's yahrzeit. So it's in December, and I encourage everyone. We'll talk about it then. But good to meet him.
We just obligated him.
Yes, I obligated him. Okay. In any case, here we go. We are working with ideas from all over Tanakh that are going to help us understand Mashiach, the coming of Mashiach, the Tikkun Olam, which somebody recently asked, is there a Hebrew Jewish word for Tikkun Olam? Because it's so pervasive. And we're going to understand what's going on in the world today, especially with feminism and Yemos HaMashiach. And we're going to learn a fundamental idea about how we are supposed to relate to Hashem and to Torah and mitzvahs, the most basic and yet deepest idea. We're going to start out with going back to last week's Parsha, not reviewing what we spoke about last week, taking it to a whole nother level. Whatever we talked about last week with Kedusha, knowing what not to say and do and think and how that expands us, we're taking it to an even more subtle level. Kedusha means mufrash, to separate. There is separation in action. Separation, again, what we don't do, what we don't say. And now we'll talk about what we don't think. What we don't think. To be mufrash, to be separated, is to take yourself away from something. To hold yourself back. All of history, Jewish history, the Jews as the light to the nations, or Lagayim, the history of humanity as it progresses in the mind. We have the same bodies as we had in the beginning of history, but our way of thinking has, certainly in the advanced countries, has entirely changed. Humanity, the Jewish people, the Messianic process, this is all evolution. And it's evident also what we're going to see, this evolution in the relationship of men and women, because women in a relationship with men are receivers. Humanity are receivers from Hashem. The Jewish people are receivers of the Torah. There's going to be an entire shift, a paradigm change from the relationship as it is thought of from the earliest stages of giver and receiver, man and God, woman and man, Jewish people and Hashem, this world and the cosmos, the physical world, the spiritual world. There's going to be a shift in how we understand the giver-receiver relationship and its process as it changes and evolves and advances and becomes more and more closer to what it's meant to be. Mufrash means take yourself out of the equation. The weakness of man, the initial state of mankind in relationship to the world and to God, and the long time position of women in relationship to men was that the world, everybody operated on a profit-loss equation vis-a-vis the world, God, or marriage. What do we mean by this? A human being takes stock of themselves, and they say, look, back in the day, right? I'm a person. I have desires. I need to eat. I need to be safe. I don't want to be in pain. I need food, clothing, and shelter. That's what my needs are. And I'm afraid. I have fears. I'm afraid of dying, abandonment, suffering, being wounded, not being able to take care of myself, being victimized. I'm afraid. I have a whole world here. I have other people around me. I need to make sure I'm safe. So I will relate to the world, to everybody, in terms of profit and loss. If I do this for you, will I get this in return? Right? It's utilitarian. I won't steal from you, so you won't steal from me. The mankind looked around the world and said, there are forces out here that can control whether I live or die, my pain, my suffering, my comfort. Let me do what I have to do to keep them happy, so they'll do what they can do to keep me happy. Mankind related to the world, and by definition, their conception of God, was an instrumental kind of picture. God was an instrument. All forces of nature were instruments. Humanity had a relationship where they instrumentalized God. How can I use God to my benefit and keep God happy so he won't harm me? And that relationship is the default relationship of humanity to God, certainly the relationship of women to men for thousands of years. And even in the development of a human being, that's the original early type of relationship between a child and a parent. But everybody knows that this doesn't make for a satisfying relationship. This is all based on profit and loss. This is because we are in the grip of fear and desire. But nobody thrives in that kind of relationship. It's all manipulation. It's all subjective. It's not what we're supposed to be doing, but it's the original position of all people and virtually every relationship. When you hear people saying today, I'll put a mezuzah on my door so it will protect me. I'll say pitam ketorah so my kid will get a shidduch. That is the instrumentalization of God. Rambam tells us this is not acceptable. This is an aberration. This is profit and loss. This is not called having a relationship with God at all. The entire concept of Kedusha is called take yourself out of the equation. Be mufresh. Try to get to know Hashem on his own terms. Learn Torah on its own terms. Do mitzvahs as they are designed to be done on their own terms. Learn and do what Hashem says with happiness that you're doing it. And two things will happen. You'll have the capacity to love Hashem for who Hashem is. You'll be able to progress from this type of relationship, which is not satisfying at all, to a love relationship. Anytime a person takes someone else on their own terms with no agenda, okay, that is the beginning of a real relationship. And everybody knows that when somebody knows they're loved and cherished for who they are, and nobody's manipulating them, that feeling is so deeply satisfying that they will give back without stop. In the Tochacha, when it tells us about bracha and klala, which is not schar v'onesh. Schar v'onesh is reward in the next world, whatever, being close to Hashem, having das. Rambam says that when Hashem promises us, this is in Hilchos Tshuva, the last chapters, he speaks about it in 7, 8, 9, 10, which we'll talk about in a minute. He says, when Hashem says, if you do my mitzvahs with love, just get into them and do them as they are and learn my Torah with joy as it is, then I will take that entire profit-loss equation out of the picture. Because I promise you'll have your rain and your health and your security, and there won't be wars and there won't be illness and everybody will be satisfied. So you'll never have to worry about profit and loss because you'll have everything you need. So you won't have to get into manipulating me. It'll all be there for you. That's not even your schar. That's just setting up the stage so you can get to know me and do my mitzvahs out of love and have a relationship of love with Hashem. I'm just going to take the whole vulnerability, fear, desire problem out of the equation completely. So you can have an opportunity to develop ahava, love of Hashem. We know that humanity did not relate to Hashem with love. They related out of fear and desire. We know that women and men had no options very often but to have such relationships because women were weak. Let's go back to let's look at the entire process. Where did it start? That women, humanity, okay, found themselves operating in this type of unfortunate relationship with either God or with each other. Exactly. Everybody knows. The Eitz Hadas. So let's summarize the whole little story quickly. Again, Rambam says in the beginning of the Moreh Nevuchim that although the Masa Bereshis, the story of the 6 days, is related in a story-like form, make no mistakes about it. It is as mystical and non-physical, non-material, non-graspable by the average mind as the Maaseh Merkava, the vision of the divine chariot that the greatest of the prophets saw in their highest prophecies, which we have no clue what that's talking about. Try to read Yechezkel and explain. You can't understand a word he says when he describes what he saw in his vision. It's the same, Rambam says. It's of the same type of mystery. However, it's given to us in a story-like form. But don't ever make a mistake of thinking that it was a garden of truffula trees and a talking snake and two people that didn't know what they were doing. It's way more, okay? We're talking about the 6 days, which on one level is the description of the core, deepest, mystical, spiritual, psychic components of man and what is going on inside man and how they think and how we operate and what kind of creature are we and what do we do with ourselves. In this story, as you know, there are 3 characters, the Nachash, the Isha, and the Ish. We spent a lot of time on this, the woman, the man, and Nachash. Freud's id, ego, and superego are an extension of this understanding. He didn't pull it out of a hat. He came from a family of Talmidei Chachamim, of Torah scholars, not his generation, maybe not even his parents, but prior to that, this was Torah thinking. The psychic components of man, that's one level. It gets deeper and deeper mystically. Bottom line is, Hashem says to man, in other words, this is Gan Eden is the ideal. There's an ideal. We don't find ourselves originally, when we achieve consciousness as an individual, as a nation, as humanity, we're not in Gan Eden. We're working our way back to an ideal state that lives deep in our consciousness because it's real and we once knew what it was. So God says in that ideal state, the ideal state, I want you, the first mitzvah, and people often think that pru'ervu, having children, is the first mitzvah. No. The first mitzvah is Mikol Eitz Hagan Achol Tochal. This is my world. It has everything in it. There is no end to what I've created here and what humanity could do with their creativity, okay, and their ingenuity, and their tzelem Elokim, their capacity to be creators, and use their subjective point of view and their subjective understanding and their subjective way of thinking to take my world and do whatever, endless things with it. Physics, science, art, architecture, literature, who knows? There's no end to human creativity. There's just no end. So Hashem says, do everything, use everything that you find, eat from every tree, use everything you find the way you'd like to use it for the purpose of Tzelem Elokim, create out of this world, using all these resources, a place that represents Hashem. I will conceal myself. You will reveal me in my own world. I leave it to you. You find me, you reveal me, you build a lifestyle based on what you've discovered about what's right and what's true, and I'll help you along, and I'll reveal things to you, and I'll be there by your side, but it's a partnership. Just don't eat from the tree of Das, of Tov V'Ra, which is another way of saying don't become subjective. Tov and Ra is good and bad. That's subjectivity, as opposed to objectivity, which is truth and falsity. True is true. 2 + 2 is 4. It's not subjective. I don't care if you're black or white or a woman or disabled. It's still 4. It's not okay to say, oh, well, because she's disadvantaged, for her it could be 4.3. It's just 4, no matter what. And everybody has to deal with that. Okay? Objectivity is truth. Subjectivity is not truth. It's the way I see it. Do not become entirely subjective. You're subjective enough as individuals with autonomy to bring your own touch to the world, but don't become so subjective that you only see things your way, in which case you will be dead. Because you will not relate to anything in a proper manner, in a realistic manner. You will distort everything to fit into your particular position, how you see it, and it won't be true. And you'll ruin your own capacity to know what exists and what's out there, and to have a relationship with the real world on the real world's terms. And you'll find yourself completely submerged and imprisoned by your fears. You'll say that this person is blind because the snake god cursed them, and there's nothing we can do about it, and then everyone will just go blind, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's the world you'll live in. Because you won't know how the eye works. And you won't be able to see that there's a nerve that perhaps is damaged, and you won't be able to fix it. Because you'll interpret everything according to your own foolish fears and imagination and fantasy that you'll invent. Because you won't be able to be objective and know things for what they are. That's the condition. So, however, what do? We become subjective. And then we eat from the tree. And then we lose this, then we can't operate as we're meant to operate, and now we start history. Mankind finds itself entirely subjective. And they relate to the world with an assortment. Everything out there has a personality and whatever. They invent crazy stories, mythologies, legends to explain everything, and it's all complete nonsense. And it keeps them in the grip of fear. And it holds them back, and they're stupid and backwards, and they suffer and live in darkness and misery. Now, at the same time, look what happens. Hashem says the relationship between men and women is going to change too. And by the moon, which is Levana, the female, diminishes too. Women and men in the Gan Eden did not need to relate to each other. Certainly women did not need to relate to each other with any type of profit or loss calculation. A woman didn't need a man to protect her in Gan Eden, to provide for her food, to save her from conquering armies or rapists. She didn't need anything. So what was the relationship between men and women? Ideally, what is the ideal? A compatibility based on love, appreciation, shared dreams and values, different but equal. That's a proper relationship. This changed because Hashem said two things to the woman: you will be regularly weakened by menstruation, gestation, pregnancy, right? Nursing, children. You're going to be weak, and you're going to be encumbered, and you're not going to be able to pick up and move, and you're not going to be able to take care of yourself. And now, in addition, I made bezeya sapecha tochal lechem. It's going to be hard to just eke your sustenance out of the earth. There'll be, thorns and thistles instead of crops. You have to, from dawn to dusk, you're going to have to break your bones with sweat and work to get food, which was a condition of man till very, very recently. So now you have, Rav Hirsch explains, a division of labor. To bring home the food takes physical strength and stamina and time. That the man has that. The woman is having children and is always weak, and what's supposed to happen now? We have a division of labor. Voila, suddenly the woman is dependent on the man. And women have suffered from this for thousands of years, and they've had to relate to their husbands in a total profit and loss calculation. If I do this, he will abandon me. He will not feed my children. He will take another wife. I won't get what I need. I won't be protected. I need to keep him happy. This is not conducive to a relationship of love between men and women. And women, as you know, most of the time in most societies all over the world, suffered terribly from this until the modern age, where we see women said ad kan. And by the way, women didn't just say ad kan because they got sick of it. And men didn't just say, we really should give women more opportunities. That's not what happened. As Hashem predicted, as the Kabbalah predicts in the story of the Mabul, as history progresses, there will be a boom, an explosion of knowledge, objective knowledge of science, and the world will advance. And this is a Kabbalistic idea based on the Psukim in the Mabul story that Hashem will open up the windows of heaven, which the Kabbalah says represents the actually mid-1800s, where there will be an explosion of knowledge. People will begin to know things. Technology will develop, science will advance, life will change, people will be freed of the curse of sweat of your brow. Everything will be different. There was an industrial revolution. There was a technological revolution. people began to work to advance scientifically, and suddenly, it wasn't by the sweat of your brow anymore. Suddenly, a woman and men could compete for parnasa. They could both work on a computer. They could both work on an assembly line. They could both work in a factory with machines. And suddenly, and of course, they added to that the development of the birth control pill. And suddenly, women said, "Hey, we're free, and surviving isn't so hard, and we could support ourselves." And slowly, things began to change, and women understood that for the first time, if they could be independent and self-supporting, they could actually stop being dependent on men. And the mistake feminism made was they then extrapolated from this that marriage and family and children were relics of the past that were designed to, keep women, held back and blah, blah. So they did away with, that was their big error. They threw the baby out with the bathwater, did away with marriage and children, denigrated the whole thing. They learned unfortunately, the terrible repercussions are obvious. But what they understood was that there was a possibility that women and men can have relationships not based on a profit-loss calculation anymore, but on love, compatibility, wanting to be together. The people that benefited the most from the feminist revolution are religious people, because we have the capacity for women to be independent, which is a wonderful thing. So we take that profit-loss out of the equation often, unless a person decides to be dependent, but it's a decision. Unlike our grandparents who weren't able to choose such a thing. But we still value marriage and family. We still value children. And therefore, we have the best of both worlds. We value marriage, we value children, but we're also relating on a different level. If you read a shidduch today, and you say, he will protect you and take care of you if you're nice to him, would you like to marry him because he has good teeth, and he has a strong horse, and he can protect you, and you will probably be secure if you're nice to him? We don't even, right?
Well,
right now, let's go back. So we have a shift in men's relationships. We have a shift in humanity. Kedusha, the mitzvah of Kedoshim to you, the entire Torah. Now we talk about the Torah. The Torah was given to Am Yisrael to, as we say in Aleinu, to serve as the vehicle for Tikkun Olam, which is not a reform concept. Okay? In other words, we say every day in Aleinu, Letaken Olam b'malchut shakai, to fix the world. Fix what? The Torah is here to do Tikkun on the sin. In other words, the Torah here is to take man from a state of dependency, calculation of profit and loss based on fear, to a state of love of Hashem. Love, partnership, working together. This is the whole point of the Torah. So you can expect that even before we reach this end stage in human history that we're at now, even before feminism and technology and the advancement of man's consciousness, the development of a capacity to even conceive that relationships should all be out of love, whether they're between man and God, man and man, parents and children, should all be love, not fear. Okay? Even before that you see, and you would expect to see, and you do see, the Torah being a tikkun should have measures in place to work against this unfortunate phenomenon that women, men, Am Yisrael and Hashem need to operate with this fear-loss calculation. So we said before, the Torah has the bracha and the klala. Love Hashem, take him on his own terms, do the mitzvahs, and you'll never have to worry about your needs. And you won't have to bring this calculation at all into the picture. What about men and women? The Rabbanon, the rabbis, those horrible patriarchal rabbis that everyone likes to, well, not everyone, but some people like to really, really terribly, wrongly misjudge. Do you know what they did? The rabbis instituted laws designed entirely to restore the dignity of women and take away their dependence, or at least take out of the equation the fear that their dependence led them to. So the rabbis instituted the following restrictions upon themselves. Yichud, they are not allowed to be alone with a woman, even if she doesn't care, because the woman, being weaker and helpless and afraid, we could often submit to a more aggressive man who threatens her or whatever, right? They prohibited upon themselves yichud. That came from David's time. They prohibited upon themselves negia, touching women, even if a woman doesn't care. They prohibited kol isha, listening to a woman sing and getting excited and maybe taking advantage of her. They prohibited, this is probably deraisa to some degree, erva, looking at a woman who's not dressed. Why? Because they said we are not allowed to allow ourselves to derive one iota of sensual pleasure from a woman unless we commit on the dotted line with two witnesses to providing her, it's called marriage, ksuva, food, clothing, shelter, and sexual rights. Until we commit to all of those, we don't get anything. So what does that do? It takes, like the bracha and the klala, it takes the worry, I better please him or he won't feed me, or he won't house me, or he won't give me clothing, or he'll leave me for another person, or he'll ignore me. Okay? It takes that entirely out of the equation because the man is obligated by law in front of witnesses. Notice we don't sign anything. It's one-way street. The ksuva protected women for thousands and thousands of years, and it was the most advanced document, arrangement in marriage that the world has ever seen. And the aguna problem today has nothing to do with the validity of the ksuva and the value of the ksuva. The problem is that the get is we don't have a no-fault divorce. You're divorced, goodbye, we're both leaving, end of story. No. The point of the get is that a man cannot unilaterally absolve himself of his obligations. He has to be absolved by a beis din. He needs a beis din to absolve him. He signed that he's committed. He has to be legally absolved or he's committed. The problem today is, and the Hasidim don't have an aguna problem, is that we have no kehillah structure, no way to enforce anything, and everybody can do whatever they want with the law. They can manipulate and violate any law they want, and we're not organized in a way that we can help it. So they say, I'm not giving you get. That's it. Now, obviously, we have to face that problem and deal with it as best as we can to avoid the problem, clearly. But the problem is not in the ksuva. The problem is that we have no capacity in case you have a horrible person who says, I'm not legal. By the way, the person who doesn't give a get is not legally absolved from his obligations, but they just absolve themselves. People can absolve themselves of keeping Shabbos, too. People could absolve themselves of anything. We're in a situation where we can't control. By the way, quickly, two people start a business, and they're both Shomer Shabbos, right? And they have an agreement. And then one decides they're not Shomer Shabbos anymore. And they start opening the store on Shabbos. And they make 80% of the week's profits on Shabbos. That could happen. So what? So that's Shabbos. That's not Shabbos' problem. That's people can violate and manipulate and abuse any halacha. So that's the issue with the gittin. But that's to leave that aside. So you see that the Torah, way before Mashiach, already had measures in place to try as best as possible to eliminate from the calculation of marriage fear of all, being helpless. There was a commitment to basic needs being taken care of, and therefore there was a possibility that women and men, knowing they'd be taken care of in a marriage, could start to choose a marriage partner that they prefer and relate to that person not because of profit and loss, but because of love. The entire goal is for everybody to relate to their children, to their spouse, and to Hashem with love and nothing else. Because there's nothing, everything else is dissatisfying. It's terrible. It's humiliating. We don't want a master-servant relationship on any level in any place. So now we start looking at the Messianic trends. And here we're going to get into Tanakh. We're going from fear to love. Right? We're going from profit and loss to partnership, joint efforts, joint energies, real unity. real oneness, real connection. And by the way, in Gan Eden, if man and woman would bond together and have children, yes, the man was the giver biologically, and the woman was the receiver biologically. But the woman received and then gave order to give. You receive in order to give. You conceive, but then you have a child. This does not constitute any imbalance. This is a joint decision of love and compassion and compatibility and joint dreams. This is not anything about dependence and fear. So giving and taking doesn't mean out of fear. Giving and taking could be out of love. That's the highest level. Now, the Messianic trend. We said that if you're going to see things change between humanity and Hashem, you're going to see things change between men and women. Because women are the mashal for humanity, for the moon, okay, which also was diminished and will be restored. These are all female concepts. The woman represents the change, the taking out of fear to taking out of love, or connecting out of, or bonding, relating out of fear to relating out of love. So it is no surprise that as history progresses, women, based on technology, happens first, women say, we want relationships that are equal. We want love relationships. But there's more than that. As that happens among women, that happens also among humanity. Now, you look at the progression of Mashiach. You're going to expect to see two things. A, women loving men, not needing them. Women initiating relationships with men, as is happening today, for the probably first time in history where women, it turns out, seem to be initiating more even more equal or more to men relationships, not waiting for them to be found, or which isn't necessarily a good thing. Women don't like it, or chased, or but starting the relationships. And you will see that there's a emphasis on the concept of women and men loving each other. Okay? If you have a Tanakh in front of you, you'll see something striking. Anyone have a Tanakh? Shmuel Aleph. Perek Yud Ches. Notice this. When we talk about Mashiach, who do we always think about? David HaMelech. Okay? David HaMelech has the distinction, by the way, Adam is Adam, Aleph, David, Dalid, Mashiach. By the way, Nachash, Mashiach, same gematria. Nachash and Mashiach, same gematria. Right? Why? It's a process. It's all a process. We evolve. We evolve. David HaMelech being the link, the main, link in the chain between our original state and our ideal state that we're moving towards, okay? David has a distinction above everyone else of being related to in pure love. Who are the two people that loved David? That's Yonatan and Michal. The only woman in all of Tanakh that is said about her that she loved a man is Michal. Both Yonatan and Michal were Shaul's children. And here it is all in Shmuel Aleph Perek Yud Ches. Okay, the Perek says the following. Shmuel Aleph Perek Yud Ches. Watch these two psukim. You could write this down. Those who are listening should take out a Tanakh. Listening beyond this room, and follow these psukim. Here, Perek Yud Ches. Okay, here. Vayomer Elav Shaul. Ben mi ata hanar? Shaul said to him, who are you, my son? Whose son are you? Vayomer David, and David said, Ben avdecha Yishai beis halachmi. I'm the son of your servant Yishai from Beis Lechem. Vayhi kechalosu ledaber el Shaul. And when David stopped speaking to Shaul, look at the next words. V'nefesh Yehonasan nikshara b'nefesh David. V'ye'ahavehu. And his soul was totally tied up with David's soul, and he loved him. When we speak about a love that is not contingent on anything, who is the example? Ava she'ena tuloya bedavar. David and Yonasan. Now we know what it means that it's not contingent on anything. Yonasan did not instrumentalize David. He did not say, because he'll probably be the next king, I'll ingratiate myself with him or I'll be good to him so he'll give me a position. Yonasan did not say that. Yonasan said, there's a good chance I'm going to be the next king. I officially abdicate completely to David. I give up everything. And his father was furious, by the way. Yehona's son abdicates entirely, his entire future. And he never asked David for a position in David's Malchus. That is called love. There is no instrumentalization of this relationship. He is not using David as an instrument. He is loving David on his own terms with nothing in return that he ever asked for. That's love. Taking David on his own terms. That's Mashiach. When the Klal Yisrael can take Hashem on Hashem's own terms. There's a pure love relationship. And don't forget, when we can do this to another person, the love they show in return is endless. The appreciation, the gratitude, the showering that with love in return upon us is no end. Because the deepest satisfaction a person can get, and Hashem too, that they are treated, that they're taken on their own terms and appreciated and loved for who they are. Period.
David didn't do that.
To who?
To Jonathan.
David loved Yonasan.
Yeah,
But Yonasan they didn't have much time. Yonasan and David's relationship was over pretty before it started because Yonasan died with his father. Later in the relationship, later in the Perek, okay, look what it says, and it's the only time in Tanakh you're going to see this. Pasuk Chaf. Vatehav Michal Bashol es David. And Michal loved David. That's a woman loving a man. It doesn't say about any other person, any other woman in Tanakh. Because when you get to Mashiach, the relationship is entirely love. When you get to the end of days. Rambam says that Sfiras HaOmer is Am Yisrael counting with bated breath, so to speak, out of love for that time, Shavuos, which is David HaMelech's birthday, where we will accept the Torah out of love. Not conditional, not sevenishma, not as an instrument, just out of love. We tried, but it didn't work very well. And then Hashem broke the luchos, but we got kapara and we started again. The goal is to work towards a relationship entirely out of love and not like we have done, which happens very often in relationships. You aim for that, but you fall back into profit and loss, manipulation and instrumentalization. You try for the love, but it's hard to operate entirely like that. On the other hand, it's the easiest thing in the world to do. Once you do it, everything else is taken care of. If you go back through the history, trust is, say, if we can trust Hashem and take Hashem on his own terms, we'll never have to worry about anything.
But once you can let go.
That's right. Let go of your subjective, fear-based relationship. Exactly.
The trust.
Yes, exactly. Humanity had a hard time of letting go, either because in reality, they just didn't have enough knowledge, which we're going to get to. So how could they let go? By the way, Rambam says, we're going to get to this. Let's just go through. I'll take all questions at the end, even though hopefully we have a few more minutes. Hopefully I'll finish in shortly and we could do this. There's so much to think about here. As you look through Tanakh at the progressive steps of the development of Mashiach, you're going to find a pattern. There are stages in the development of Mashiach, and in every stage, women initiate the relationship with the man. It is not fear and helplessness, it is initiation, taking control. This is the Messianic state, is the woman, the makabel, is equal, strong, and plays an equal role as partners. So where do you go all the way back? What's the first stage in the development of David HaMelech that we know of? When? Who? Way before Ruth and Naomi. Tamar. Way before Tamar. Lot's daughters. Perek Yud Tes, Perek 19. Okay? Here's what it says. Perek 19 in Bereshis, in Vayera. Okay? Psukim 31, Lamed Aleph to Lamed Ches. You could quickly find it. Someone can call out the place.
98?
Look at Pasuk 31. Vatomer habachira el atzira, the older said to the younger. They took control. Avinu zakein ve'ishein ba'aretz lavo aleinu kederech al aretz l'cha nashka. They say, let's make a plan. Women initiate. This is a relationship of women taking control. Okay, this is not love. This was out of, desire to repopulate the world. But women look to the future, and they are equal, if not the initiators of the relationship. Okay, what's next? After the daughters of Lot, then comes wait before Rus. What's next? No, what's in David? Tamar. Perek Lamed Ches in Bereshis. Look at 38 in Bereshis. What do we have? Here is Tamar. So it's Pasuk 13 to 19. Vayugad leTamar lemer hine chamich olet timna legos sonos. They told Tamar, your father was going to shear the sheep. Vatasar bigdei al manusa. She takes off her clothing of mourning, widow clothing, and she dresses herself up. Right? Vayira Yehush. I'm skipping, and she sees Yehuda, and Yehuda thought Yehuda sees her and thinks she's a zona. Okay, she's a prostitute, and he goes to her, and he didn't know who she was, and she said, "What are you going to give me?" She controlled the situation, right? Everyone knows that. Again, this is David HaMelech. After that, what do you get? Who's the next one? Rus. Everybody knows it's Perek Gimel, the story of Rus. She goes to Boaz. She says, you should marry me. I'm your closest of kin. I'm now related to your closest of kin. You should marry me. And he does. Okay. And then you have the story of David's mother. David's mother took control and took initiative. There's a long story there, just in a nutshell. David's father and mother had separated because there was a machlokas that had arisen and based in whether Rus had really been allowed to marry Boaz in the first place 3 generations ago. And while that machlokas was not resolved, Yishai said, I'm a grandchild of Rus. If she has never been allowed to marry a Jew based on a halacha that a Moavi can marry a Jew, they were trying to figure out, was it men, women, both? They were discarded. He said, well, maybe my grandmother was never allowed to marry Boaz, therefore I'm not a legitimate Jew, therefore let me separate from my wife who is a legitimate Jew. This is wrong. So they separated. But they resolved that Rus was a kosher gerus and she was allowed to marry Boaz. But while that was all happening, David's mother, who Torah tells, Chazal tell us, knew with Ruach HaKodesh that there was nothing wrong in this relationship. She was a complicated story. He had taken a Pilegesh temporarily. She went and switched places with the Pilegesh, and she went to Yishai, and that's how David was conceived, by the way, and that's why they thought that he wasn't a legitimate child, because there had been a whole machlokas brewing whether he was even allowed to be married to her. This is what David comes from: confusion and a woman that knew and took initiative, took control. This is Mashiach all the way through. And then you have Michal, who's not the mother of Shlomo, but you have Michal and Yehonasan who love David. And so everything you're going to see about Mashiach is telling you that the Makabel is not relating to the giver in profit and loss and need and dependence. It's an entirely different relationship. It's a knowledge, a absolute knowledge that there must be a relationship, and they initiate it, and they partner in it, and they make it happen. And that's Am Yisrael, and by definition, by extension, humanity, taking the initiative and making a relationship with Hashem because it's good for us and it must be, and that's what we want. And we take Hashem on Hashem's terms, and it's a relationship of love. And if we do that, Hashem has promised us everything else will fall away. You'll never have to operate in any other way. That whole terrible arrangement of fear it won't apply to you. Just like it won't apply to a woman who has a ksuva. It won't apply to Am Yisrael. And by the way, the Shavuos, David Melch's birthday, Matan Torah, it's the Luchos were considered a ksuva. Now we know that Am Yisrael couldn't do it, but we got a second chance, which is what happens very often. But the goal is to move towards a relationship that is not in any way instrumentalized. It is a relationship of Ava, and that's what Sfira understands, and that's we're just going to read something right here. The Rambam, in the 10th parak, says, what is a proper relationship? Ha'oved me'ava, he who serves Hashem from love. Osek b'Torah, he's busy with Torah. Uba mitzvos, with mitzvos. V'holech b'nesivos ha'chochma, and they go with the wise path. Lo mipnei davar, but not for anything in the world, not for some reason, not as an instrument. V'lo mipnei yira, and not for fear, not for desire, and not for fear. V'lo kedei lirash hatova, not to inherit some good. Ella osa ha'emes mipnei shu emes. They do truth because it's truth. They take Hashem on his own terms. V'sof hatova livo biglala, and in the end, all the good will come because of it. And the Rambam says here a formula that is a fundamental formula that he repeats over and over again. Lefi hadeya ha'ava. 3 words, fundamental words. According to what you know is your love. To the degree you know Hashem and take Hashem on his own terms, and this applies to our children and our spouses, to the degree you get to know them and what's going on in their head and what they're coping with and what their reality is and what their needs are and what their struggles are and what they're juggling, to the degree you know them, you will love them. And they will feel that you relate to them for their own sake, out of love for them, not for any agenda, and all the good will come in return. There are some individuals in this world that to the more you know them, the more you hate them. Yes, there are. But they're very, very few. Very few. Most people, if we get to know them, we will love them. With Hashem, Rambam says, just take Hashem on his own terms. In fact, I have sources if anybody wants to see, but I'll just tell you quickly. In Hilchos Mezuzah, Rambam says, don't use a mezuzah as an instrument. If I put this up, God will protect me. That's a violation of the halacha. He screams, he disdains people that operate on that level.
So
when it comes to Hilchos...
What should be the reason if somebody asks?
For mezuzah?
Yeah.
Mezuzah is a mitzvah in the Torah to remember that Hashem when we come and when we go.
Okay.
Rambam says in Hilchos Talmud Torah, though...
The red,
Don't even get me started. That is just pure... I'll tell you a story about that in a second. Rambam says, we only have a second. Rambam says in Hilchos Talmud Torah, anyone who uses Torah as an instrument to make money, to get status, to be respected, is a disgrace and a violation. Torah is not an instrument. Nothing about our relationship with Hashem should be reduced to the terrible, unfortunate, pathetic, primitive level of an instrument. It is way beyond an instrument. Every mitzvah is an opportunity to love Hashem on Hashem's terms. Torah is taken on Hashem's terms. It is wrong. It is death, like Hashem said. You get subjective, you're going to be dead. I'm going to stop in 1 second. When people learn Torah, and I had teachers like this, didn't go very well, who looked at the Torah and they took their 21st century sensitivities and applied them to the Torah based on pure conjecture. The Torah was an instrument. They did not take the Torah in its own terms. They looked at the Torah and said, well, this doesn't fit in with my sensitivities, so I don't accept it. I reject it. I reinterpret the Torah according to how I'd like to see things. Okay? I don't like how this law about killing all of Amalek, and I don't like this law about, it doesn't appeal to me. It's not politically correct, so I'm dismissing it. I'm reinterpreting it. Torah has to be taken. Rav Hirsch in the intro. This is must read in Bereshis. Rav Hirsch intro to Chumash, which is in the beginning of Bereshis. He explains that you must take Torah on its own terms. Imagine if a scientist had a preconceived notion that every flower is a rose. When they look at a lily or a tulip, they'll say this is just a terrible flower. It doesn't have any of the qualities of a rose, and a rose is a flower. That's what we do when we come at the Torah with our point of view. We have to put it all aside and take Torah on its own terms. Take mitzvahs on their own terms. this is our job to prepare for Shavuos, to start relating to Hashem the way it's meant to be, the way that's a benefit to us, that gives us life. This is the goal, to hopefully approach Shavuos like this. Yes, questions?
Okay, wait, so
Questions, yes, talk loud.
to love Hashem, but it also says to fear Hashem.
Love and fear, very good. Rambam, this is fundamental. Everyone stay for a second. Rambam in Hilchos Yesodei Torah goes into the stages of relating to Hashem. He has two stages, love and fear. The fear comes after love. Rambam is not talking about fear of punishment. That is a profit-loss relationship. That comes way before love, and Rambam doesn't even deal with it, and I hate to tell you what he says. He says, because women were different, women are uneducated in his day, and it was a whole, he says, that type of relationship of fear of punishment, that's for children and women. Because women, and that doesn't mean in those days, that was they didn't know, and that was unfortunately what women dealt with in their real lives. But he said it's not appropriate for anyone who's thinking and learning. You have to go past that. Then he says you have to love Hashem, and then he says beyond love is fear. The fear that Rambam's speaking about is what we're talking about today. Not fear of punishment, fear of sin. In other words, reverence, which means if you love someone so much and you respect them so much, then you will know what matters to them and what their sensitivities are. And you will, even if you might not be sensitive to the same things, you will be very conscious not to offend them, not to do something that violates their sensitivity on their terms. You will be afraid of sin, not afraid of punishment. You might not feel there's anything wrong with that behavior, but because they don't like it, you will be very careful about it. That's called fear of sin. And by the way, who went from subjective profit-loss relationship to pure objective love relationship and declared with his own mouth, this is their reality, not mine, and I accept it on its own terms. Who did that? Yehuda, David's grandfather, first said, get rid of Yosef because I don't like it. He's getting in my way. He was Leah's son, right? By the time it got to Binyamin, with the whole showdown with Yosef and Binyamin, and Yaakov loved Binyamin, and it says, just like Yonasan and David, it said, Yaakov's soul was entangled with Binyamin, nafsho kshur benafsho. Yehuda had reached the madrega where he said to Yosef, I pledged my life to protect Binyamin because my father loves him, period. That's the reality. I don't have an agenda. I don't care if this gets in my way. This is what it is, and I'll die to protect him. And that's pure love. And that's David's grandfather.
And then to carry one step further, Nachshon has the word Nachash in it.
Very good.
It's the first one to go into
That's
the
right.
water,
Beautiful.
Picking up everything from
Beautiful. And that's Sheva Yehuda. Beautiful. Excellent. Who else? Question.
Just getting back to the fear thing with the mezuzah, why then when somebody's sick or there's misfortune?
You check the mezuzah?
Check on mezuzah.
Because, first of all, in Torah, a Torah scroll that's puzzle, a mezuzah is written on parchment. It has to be kosher. If you're working with a puzzle, a mitzvah, in other words, you don't have the mitzvah of mezuzah. Now the mitzvah of mezuzah is not happening. You don't have it. There's no mezuzah on your house. That doesn't mean you won't be protected. That is a concept that you're not fulfilling a mitzvah properly, and that's not a good thing. And you should do it properly whether or not.
Doesn't everyone think of this is protecting the house?
Well, it's wrong.